Welcome to the Soul Story Show, where real conversations and soulful stories help you live and write your next chapter. I'm your host, Brooke-Sidney Harbour, and today's guest is someone who has truly rewritten the rules of entrepreneurship over and over again. Clarence Wooten is a serial tech entrepreneur, startup investor, and visionary who has built and exited multiple companies, making history. But today, we're diving into his latest venture and book, CoFounder.AI. Clarence has spent decades at the intersection of innovation, leadership, and soul, and now he's turning his wisdom toward helping others find the perfect co-founder using artificial intelligence. But this conversation today isn't just about tech. It's about vision, perseverance, legacy, and believing in yourself when no one else does. So let's get into it. Clarence, welcome to the show.
Thanks for a great intro. I appreciate you, Brooke. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. I'm so excited to talk about the book. There's so much to cover here. So let's get started. So for people that may or may not know, you've been a tech entrepreneur for decades, but let's go back to young Clarence. What first sparked your entrepreneurial spirit?
That's a really, really good question. Actually, it was probably video games. I'm a product of the Atari generation, for those of us who remember that. And to buy those game cartridges, which I so desperately wanted as a kid, I had to figure out a way to make some money. And when it would snow, growing up in Baltimore, my friends and I, we would all grab shovels and just go knocking on doors to see if we could shovel people's driveways and walkways. And hopefully at the end of, several long, hard days of shoveling, we came out with $30, which is what it cost to buy Donkey Kong Jr. or Miss Pac-Man cartridges. And so I would say, yes, being involved in video games and then later personal computers really bought out the fact that I was truly an entrepreneur.
I love that. Well, I know in the book you mentioned that your parents were also, entrepreneurs, small business owners. So I'm curious, was there a particular, I always think of things as soul stories, a moment or chapter in your life that helped shape your identity as a tech entrepreneur, as a founder?
For certain. Like many, I grew up with parents who were small business owners, but they were small business owners because they had to be self-employed to avoid being underemployed. Literally, neither one of my parents actually had a college degree at the time. My mom later went back and got a degree. But fortunately for me, right around the age, I'm going to say 13, we left Baltimore City and moved to a predominantly Jewish suburb. And I noticed when I would go to my Jewish friend's house from middle school that they were living a whole lot different than I was living. They truly were living a middle-class lifestyle. Mom didn't work, so they didn't have a two-income household. Dad owned a CPA firm, swimming pool in the backyard, caterers coming over, all these things that I hadn't been exposed to. So I started asking questions like, what does your dad do? And I got answers like, oh, my dad's a CPA. He owns a CPA firm. And it dawned on me that, you can't become a CPA unless you go to college. And so college is not an afterthought. It's the ticket. And I also realized that there's two types of businesses. Those are small businesses, which again, I was familiar with from my parents, but they were also bigger businesses. And, the differences between them were stark. If you were a small business owner, then you were pretty much working for yourself. But when you stopped working, money stopped coming in. If you had built a business of scale, then you had built this asset that worked whether you showed up every day or not, because you had teams of people and leverage. And so I was fascinated by the other side of entrepreneurship, how to build a big business, which, really became kind of my focus upon graduating college and deciding I was going to invest my 20s in entrepreneurship, but not to do it as a small business owner, to shoot for something bigger.
I love that. So one of the things that you break down clearly in CoFounder.AI, and we're going to get into it, is the mindset difference between a startup and a small business. You say a startup is designed to scale. It thinks like a shareholder from the start. That's a powerful shift, right? And right now, Black Americans, especially Black women, are starting businesses at record rates. But I wonder, are we starting businesses with a startup mindset or a small business one? Are we thinking about the scale, systems, and liquidity that you mentioned, or just survival and self-employment, kind of like your parents? What do you think is the mindset shift we need to make if we want to build businesses that last, grow, and even exit?
First, I would say start by reading my book because I try to do a good job at explaining the differences between a small business mindset and the mindset of a startup founder. Because the startup's goal is not to stay a small business. Now, technically, under the rules of what's considered a small business in America, any company with less than 500 employees is a small business. But startups aren't designed to necessarily do that. I mean, they're designed to become big businesses, not stay small businesses. So part of the mindset shift is you probably need to unlearn some of the things you've learned. One of the things I mentioned in the book is that, my dad told me that I should always own 51% of any business that I started, which makes sense from a small business perspective, but it doesn't make sense if you're trying to build a scalable enterprise and you're taking advantage of leverage. Case in point, Jeff Bezos owns less than 9% of Amazon. Mark Zuckerberg owns less than 13% of Facebook, but both of those guys are worth over $100 billion. So, do you want to own 100% of a grape, or do you want to own 10% of a watermelon at the end of the day? And so that's the mindset shift, and understanding that there are differences in how you structure and build one of these companies. Now, what's great about AI is it's now the ultimate form of leverage. And so you can build these companies without having to raise a substantial amount of capital out the gate, depending on what your business model is.
I love that. So let's jump fully into it. So let's talk about CoFounder.AI, the book. What inspired you to write it?
Having been a serial entrepreneur my whole career and one of the earlier African Americans to have success as an internet startup founder with an exit, over the last couple of decades, founders have come to me asking, "Hey, Clarence, how did you do it? What's your process?" And in the early 2010s, I started blogging about it and thinking about it. And I also thought about writing a book, but books came out like the Lean Startup that did a pretty good job. And I don't do anything that's a me too. So I wasn't just going to write another book on how to build a startup. It was in late 2022 when the Chat GPT moment happened. And, I had a chance to, basically use Chat GPT and then Bard, which has become Gemini at Google, and some of these other large language models to see how powerful they were. At that particular point, it was a no-brainer. I realized very, very quickly that this is the ultimate form of leverage, that, even more so than venture capital. So if you're a founder and you're trying to bootstrap a business, you can do 10 times more with 10 times less resources. So this is a great opportunity to write a book with a unique twist, a book on how to build a scalable company, but leveraging AI to do it. And so that was really the moment which made me decide to do it.
I love that because in the book, you talk a lot about artificial intelligence and you talk often about having it be almost like a marriage in terms of your founders and co-founders. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you blend your personal entrepreneurial experience with AI innovation and why was it important to tell the story this way?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think any book that's an interesting read, at least for me, has always had some personal elements in it, some storytelling. The book is not certainly not a memoir, but if I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship, I should at least articulate some of the hard fought lessons that I learned. And so the first chapter is actually called the co-founder conundrum because it really talks about some of the dynamics of structuring a co-founder relationship and the pros and cons of having a human co-founder versus now we can have an AI co-founders, which is really what CoFounder.AI, the online platform component of the book, is about. It's about giving you that AI powered co-founder. And so, it was really important to me to share bits and pieces of my journey, the highs and the lows, because a lot of people think entrepreneurship, they only hear the wins, but it's those losses that become learning lessons. And so, I thought it was important to share some of that stuff too, and some of the things that go on behind the scenes, because when a company gets acquired and you read the headlines in the Wall Street Journal, you think, wow, everything must have been amazing. But it's a real journey, and that journey involves people, and people are complicated. And I wanted to tell some of those stories as well.
Yes, you did a really good job at sharing, I feel like, the behind the scenes between your relationships as a co-founder with one of your first companies. But one of the things I really loved about the book and honestly didn't expect was how CoFounder.AI feels almost less like a book you just read and more like a book that you would actually use. I mean, in the book, you've got quick actions, AI hacks, self assessments, and even tool alerts that guide people to your platform. It's like a blueprint meets workbook meets tech launchpad. Can you walk us through why you structured the book this way and what are you hoping readers would do, not just learn as they move through it?
I hate to use the analogy kind of a startup Bible, but a Bible is something that people go back to, right? And they remember certain passages and they go back to those passages in times of need. And, I wanted CoFounder.AI to sort of be a cross between a reference book and a book that was a good read as a story. So again, this is the first book that I've ever written, but I feel like I've accomplished that based on your feedback and feedback that I've received from others. So that's certainly exciting.
Sure. You structured the book, in an unusual way, making it more of a workbook and having the reader kind of go along. And there's tech prompts where they can obviously analyze themselves. And there's also tools that you've linked to the book to help them better utilize the things that you're discussing. So I was just curious why you structured it that way and what you hoped readers.
I guess in addition to what I already said, AI is changing so rapidly. So to write a book and put all the latest and greatest AI information in those printed pages, which are, they become permanent, wouldn't work for this subject matter, right? So a lot of the book is about how to build a big business, how AI applies, but we needed to build an online platform in tandem so that we can implement those AI workflows, tools, agents, you name it, so that it would never be stale and out of date, right? So you can leverage the book, which gives you the core playbook, but then you can also leverage the platform, which gives you the latest and greatest tools and models to execute those playbooks. And so it was important to sort of do them both together.
It's great because you actually are kind of living and teaching, even with the writing of the book and building this platform, exactly what's inside of the book and how we should be thinking about these tools as they continue to evolve. So, switching subjects just a little, it seems like one of the deeper messages in your book is that before you can really align with the right co-founder, whether it's a person or AI, you have to align with yourself. And that means getting radically honest about your strengths and your weaknesses, your leadership style, and even your blind spots, which you actually share some in the book. How has that kind of self-reflection shaped your own decisions? And what would you say to founders who are just starting that inner work?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're young, everybody has a vision of being the next Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg and start one business and take it to billions and be the CEO and be famous. But as you start to operate as an entrepreneur, particularly over a longer period of time, you start to learn what your superpowers really are, really what you're good at, and more importantly, what you enjoy. I know that I enjoy the 0 to 1 process, going from idea to initial company. I often give the analogy, I'm the guy who's going to come up with the concept and assemble the plane in midair and get it flying. But I'm not necessarily the guy who needs to fly that plane day in and day out once it gets to altitude. At that particular point, I could literally parachute out, monitor it from air traffic control. And when it's time to land that plane or very strategic moments, then, hopefully I can jump back into the pilot or co-pilot seat or somewhere else that adds value because I'm a shareholder first in that plane, not necessarily the guy who needs to be flying it. And, once I learned that about myself and I learned that that's where my superpower lies, then, I think it became easier for me to be successful as an entrepreneur and easier for me to do more. And so, I encourage any entrepreneur to really figure out where they fall and recognize that, you don't have to be the CEO. You can still own the company and be on the board and maybe even be the chairman. And I give it a great example in the book. I thought Reid Hoffman did a masterful job while he was building LinkedIn of taking on different hats and different roles where there were times when he was CEO and there were times when he was chief product officer. But at the end of the day, he was a shareholder and he wanted to see LinkedIn successful. And matter of fact, I believe he was probably the largest individual shareholder outside of his investors. So, I just think it's important for entrepreneurs to be honest with themselves, because when you're building a big business, it's not a small business, and you have to look at yourself as a shareholder first.
I completely agree. Thinking through the roles that AI can play kind of in this co-founder selection, what do you believe AI should do in terms of the human part of decision making, especially when picking something as nuanced as a co-founder? Can AI help you there?
Well, I mean, I believe we're moving into a space where whether you're an entrepreneur or an employee, it doesn't matter. You need to leverage AI. The genie's not going back in the bottle. You need to be able to leverage these tools, not just prompts, but agents, to do 10 times more. Because if you don't, whether you're an entrepreneur and your competitors are doing it, or whether you're an employee and the people you're competing with for that job are doing it, everyone has to 10x themselves because of the productivity power of AI. And so, I just think you kind of have to do that, and which is and so that's really what the book is all about, really teaching you to be a 10x founder and leverage these tools, particularly through the platform, to be able to do 10 times more. I mean, why wouldn't you have a company of 10, which was really one person, when otherwise it would be a company of one, right? And if you have a couple of other people on your team who are also AI savvy and leveraging the tools, prompts, workflows that we have on the platform, you can turn a team of 3 and have them perform like a team of 30 or more. So that's what's exciting about, where we are today.
What do you say to the entrepreneurs that are scared or fearful of AI, especially today?
There were people fearful of the web when it first came out. I remember, that a lot of businesses were like, don't you ever put your credit card on the web. Um, who knows what's going to happen out there? The internet used to be a very dark place in the early days. And now it's fully commercialized. AI is no different. And AI is going to get, it's going to get better over time. But yes, I mean, there's a part of it that we have to respect. But fear, I would say get out of the fear, because again, the genie's not being put back in the bottle. And so it's best to learn how to leverage it, because others will.
I agree. And I found that, the more that you start playing with it and trying it out, the more you're going to feel comfortable with using it, and those fears will naturally fall away. Let's switch to, I feel like, kind of your history of kind of breaking through barriers. So, as an African American tech founder, you've broken so many barriers and built boardrooms. What has that journey taught you about resilience and being seen, especially in today's society, in today's boardroom?
I think, and I haven't learned much by being successful. I've only learned by failing, right? Our educational system teaches us that it's a bad thing to fail, but literally, failure is the entrepreneur's education, right? You're not taking L's. Those L's aren't losses. Those L's are learnings. And because, it's very difficult to learn when you're successful, because you think you did everything right. But when you made a mistake that you don't want to repeat again, you will learn from that mistake. And so one of the things I talk about in my book is fail fast and fail cheap. And so resilience, I mean, for me, I was born in inner city Baltimore, literally a red line zip code that, I've often described it as, the kind of neighborhood where, as a young Black boy, you only have two choices. You can be a predator or you're going to be prey, right? It's binary. And so making it out of that probably gave me all the grit I needed to, persevere. Also, for me, failure was not an option, because I didn't think I was built to ever go and work a 9 to 5. I was a guy in high school who was pretty much late every single day. I didn't think homeroom meant anything. So I got there in time for first period. I was trying to eke out as much sleep as I could eke out. And so, the thought of doing a 9 to 5 didn't sound appealing to me. But again, I work harder than most, but I also work very different and smarter. And, that was the driver for me to become an entrepreneur. And I guess between, my humble beginnings and the perseverance of failure not being an option, because even if I fail at one startup, I'm going to do it again. And I'm going to take those investors and back the last startup that failed, and I'm going to roll them into the new startup and give them some founders equity. And that's pretty much been my playbook. And just that perseverance has enabled ultimate success. And I'm still grinding. So, this is, as far as I'm concerned, I'm just getting started.
I love that. Do you feel a responsibility to mentor or pave the way for other underrepresented founders? I mean, in the world where we know that it's hard for Black and Brown founders to get capital, I'm curious how that responsibility shows up, and for you personally, as well as in your work.
No question. I mean, even though my book is applicable for any entrepreneur, I think it's extremely applicable for a woman or a Black and Brown founder that have had a very difficult time raising capital, because in some ways this democratizes some of the abilities that you would have if you raised $1 million seed round. Now you don't have to raise $1 million seed round to get the same productivity by leveraging AI. So it will help close that early funding gap that a lot of us face.
Right.
And do I feel a responsibility? Absolutely. I've been given fireside chats and speaking at universities, several historically Black colleges and universities. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke at Spelman and Morehouse. I also pledged to give away, 10,000 copies of the book to HBCU business school students and entrepreneurship program students, if their school is actually, leveraging the book. So yeah, I feel a responsibility, and it's, but I do feel responsibility to all entrepreneurs, but specifically to those who've been underfunded, and, didn't walk into an Ivy League network, or leave Google and be able to go out and raise money from VCs on Sand Hill Road.
That's right. You mentioned earlier about your childhood and grit and resilience, but you also talk about vision. And you once said, vision is the art of seeing what is invisible to others. How has that quote or concept guided your life and even shown up perhaps even in this book?
I said that? Okay. Yeah. That sounds like something I might say. Yeah. So I think I've been fortunate. One of my superpowers is I'm a design thinker. I studied architecture originally in college. I stay read up on technology because you go a few months without reading on technology, you're left behind. And so, every morning I'm reading at least a half hour to an hour about the latest development in tech, particularly AI and other areas of tech. And so, yeah, I mean, we might have to start this one again because I lost track of what I was supposed to be saying.
That's fine. I had just said that, you talked a lot about, let me start over too. In the past and in your childhood, you talked a lot about grit and resilience, but one of the things that continues to show up in your work presently is vision. You've once said vision is the art of seeing what is invisible to others. How has that vision guided your life and even your work around this book?
I mean, my role at Google X is, really thinking about the future and being able to kind of see around corners to skate to where the puck is going. And I think my background as a design thinker, which came from an education study in architecture, which is, I believe, right brain and left brain, has really helped me connect dots. Also, just staying well read on what's happening in tech and other areas helps me connect dots and start to be able to project forward. So I'm very fortunate that's great ideas that are scalable, and that's never been a challenge. My challenge has been having enough resources to execute on those ideas, and that's what excites me so much about the power of AI, because you need a tenth or sometimes less of the resources that you would have needed in the past to get these ideas rolling. And so I actually think AI favors the generalists more so than a specialist. If you're a specialist, you'll leverage the AI tools in your specialty, and yes, you'll get a 5 to 10x productivity enhancement. But if you're a generalist and you know a little bit about a lot, and you leverage AI tools across that general spectrum, you might 100x yourself in capabilities. And so, those are the things that excite me today.
I love that. So, in the final chapter of CoFounder.AI, you reference something pretty powerful. You talk about the idea of AI as being multimodal and that it can interpret all these visual and auditory cues, even assess emotions, and even respond now with some level of empathy. And you also touch on Mustafa Suleyman's TED Talk, where he introduces the idea of AI having an action quotient, and even suggest we begin viewing AI as a new digital species. That kind of gave me chills. What does this idea, AI as a new species, mean to you? And how do you think it impacts our own evolution?
Well, I think we're going to see it pretty quickly because the robots are coming. Now that we have multimodal AI models, initially we saw call them large language models, but they do so much more than right now. Now that we have those multimodal models, those models are being used to power a new age of robotics. And so we're going to have tons and tons of robots doing various things. And so it's going to be really, really clear on what that future looks like sooner than you think. If you live in certain cities, whether we're talking about LA or San Francisco, you're already seeing robotic cars with no drivers drive people around in Waymos. And so the future is here, and and we're going to start to see it come fast, because the versions of AI that we're using today will be the worst versions we've ever used. And they're improving rapidly, and they're being incorporated and embedded into everything.
I'm so curious. This question may seem, very timely given all of, I feel like, the concerns and the fears about AI. But do you think it's possible for AI to develop empathy or consciousness, or will it always be a reflection of our level of consciousness?
That's a very, very good question. I don't know that the answer really, it will feel, even if AI doesn't truly have true consciousness or true empathy, the only thing that matters is that it feels like it does. Right. So, and I'll tell you right now, it will feel like it does. Right. And AI can look at the expression on your face, use computer vision and sentiment analysis to determine if you're happy or sad. It can change the tone of the way it speaks. It can speak in every language imaginable. The average AI has an IQ of about 160. So if you don't have an IQ of 160, why are you doing stuff without leveraging AI? Right. So yeah, I mean, it really almost doesn't matter whether AI becomes sentient or not, because it will feel that way, and it's already starting to feel that way. So I don't know that we have to even, concern ourselves too much with it. I do think we have to think about AI safety, and all of the things that it takes to sort of, maybe control to a certain extent. Which also brings me to another. I think part of your question was, how is that going to impact society and human beings? Well, when you think about humans, we've been measured in terms of productivity for the last 100 or so years, right? So when the advent of, the printing press, all of a sudden humans became more productive. And the Industrial Revolution made us way more productive. So productivity continued to rise and rise. The technological resolution, productivity rise, but it was always human productivity. Now we're at the point where artificial intelligence can be productive on our behalf, agentic AI workflows, as well as, robots, etc. So productivity from now on will start to happen without human intervention. So what happens then? Right? I believe we will probably end up having, and these are my opinions again, these are not Google's or Alphabet's, but I do believe ultimately we will, we're going to have to tax the AI and tax the robots, and use that tax money to give everybody a check of sorts. Because, if we don't, then the Elon Musks and Jeff Bezos of the world will be trillionaires, and no one else will have any money to spend. And our entire economic system doesn't work unless people have some money to spend. So humans will have to start defining themselves out in the future, based on more than just their job and vocation. Right. And I think it will give us opportunities to really get into what we're passionate about potentially. Right. If you enjoy cooking, then maybe, you become a chef. I don't have all the answers, but at the rate things are moving, that's ultimately where we're going to end up, in my opinion.
I love that. And it's fun just to kind of ponder the possibilities, especially with everything changing day by day. And I'm curious, for those of us that are entrepreneurs or startup founders, What's one practice or mindset you use to help stay inspired and in alignment with your purpose?
For me, it's nothing more intoxicating than having an idea that starts in your head and watching it become something, watching it become a company, a product, watching employees get hired and, they base their livelihood on something that was in your head at one point, watching users use your product and love it and talk about it. For me, that's like the ultimate. People say doctors kind of have a God complex, but anybody who's a builder who creates ecosystems and environments, whether it's a corporate environment or a user environment, and watches those environments grow and flourish, you're a proud parent. I mean, it's super exciting, and so that's one of the things that's always driven me. And I think most entrepreneurs need to learn to be able to think big and increment their way there, right? Because it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And as I say in the book, a lot of entrepreneurs overestimate what they can accomplish in a year, but grossly underestimate what they can accomplish in 10. So it requires that level of focus, and you have to celebrate those little wins because they keep you driven day in and day out as you're building.
I really like that. And I can appreciate what you're saying about as an entrepreneur, you basically have an idea and you're able to kind of bring it forward. That vision now becomes a reality, which is very similar to book writing. So, for all of the people out there currently writing a book, I know they want to know what was the hardest part about writing CoFounder.AI and what came surprisingly easy.
Once I sat down and the flow set in, it was easier than I thought because I had a lot in my head that needed to come out. Um, but I think for me, I held myself to the fire because I announced the book a year before it came out. And so by putting it out there publicly meant that I had to do it. And I've often used that trick, several times just to keep myself accountable. Now, as I mentioned, this is my first book. So originally I thought maybe I should hire a ghostwriter. And I started down that pathway. And we got through the process of how we were going to structure the book. But really, really quickly, I realized it wasn't coming out like my voice. So I just needed to buckle down. The good news is, had the structure in place. So I was able to sort of write the book. Now, the book is called CoFounder.AI. So I leveraged AI primarily as my editor and to make sure that the tone was right, not as my writer. And so, the whole process was great. But when I really, really got into it and got committed to it late in the game, it probably took about 4 months to write the book. And the book's not very long. It's only 148 pages. It's meant to be used in tandem with the platform. So I feel like it was the right amount because it's not intimidating. Founders can pick up the book and be like, oh, wow, I can get through this pretty quickly.
That's definitely true. It's a book that you can both read it all the way through pretty quickly, but also keep referring back over time. So now we're going to talk about our lightning round, which is kind of my favorite round or favorite thing to talk about. And I would like for you to kind of have the first answer that comes to your head. So don't think long. Okay. So what is your favorite app right now?
Any large language model, because they're all very similar, whether we're talking about Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT.
Okay, fair enough. What is a morning ritual must-have for you?
Working out, because it's really easy for, when you get so caught up in your entrepreneurial journey and all the meetings you have to take during the day, to, come up with a million excuses as to why you haven't made it to the gym. So, and this is new for me because that wasn't always the case, but some form of exercise early in the morning is a must-have.
That's definitely a great healthy habit. Okay, who is a founder or thinker who inspires you today?
Oh, wow. Lots. I take little pieces from a lot of founders because I might discover that as a founder, they're doing some incredible things, but as a human being, I'm not so sure. And so it's really an amalgamation of a number of different individuals. I prefer not to name them specifically, but several are in tech, some are in other fields outside of tech, but they've all done amazing things. And if you really want to know, then, find me on LinkedIn and I'll give you more details.
And you've listed quite a few in the book too. So for the people that are interested in some of the ones that have inspired you, there's also several mentioned in the book. What's one word that describes your entrepreneurial journey so far? One word.
Prolific.
That's true. Okay. Now we know that CoFounder.AI is probably your all-time favorite book at the moment. But what would you say is another favorite book of yours or a book that you recommend all the time?
Recently, it was another startup book written by Mike Maples, the founder of Floodgate, a venture capital firm. And I believe it's called Inflections because it talks about really how important timing is in certain external inflections to creating the right startup at the right time. And it gives a great example. Uber is one example, right? When the GPS hit the mobile phone, that created a unique opportunity to create something like Uber that didn't exist before. And so that's an example of an inflection. And so entrepreneurs really need to be aware of inflections and leverage those, to build something disruptive when those inflections occur. So I would say that book.
Okay, and so the final question in the lightning round is what's your next chapter?
I would absolutely love for, millions of founders to leverage AI. Even if you weren't a founder in the past, there's no better opportunity than to do it now. There's a word or a terminology that's being used to describe the power of leveraging AI for writing code just by talking to it, and that's called vibe coding. I believe CoFounder.AI, we've created the world's first vibe startup building platform. So it's a lot of things you should be thinking about other than writing code. Like, are you actually writing code for a problem that people are willing to pay for? And our platform helps you through all phases of conceptualizing, launching, iterating, scaling, and even exiting your startup with AI workflows. And so yeah, I would love nothing more than to look up and see tens of thousands, if not millions, of founders leverage the platform to build great businesses. And maybe a few of them will turn into billion-dollar businesses with very small teams. And so I look forward to seeing what the future brings in that regard.
Well, I appreciate all of your thoughts today. And thank you so much, Clarence, for coming. That wasn't just a conversation. It was a blueprint for building with heart, vision, and precision. For those of you new, I hope you got a glimpse into the fact that Clarence Wooten isn't just reshaping the tech world. He's showing us what's possible when you align soul with strategy. Make sure you grab your copy of CoFounder.AI. And if you're a founder, creator, or a visionary who knows your story matters and wants to turn your ideas into a best-selling book, head to Brooke-Sidneybooks.com and apply for a book chat. Again, I'm Brooke-Sidney Harbour, and this is the Soul Story Show. Remember, real conversations and soulful stories can change lives, including yours. Until next time.